Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to come and speak at your field day. This is a common problem I have, is how do you follow a presentation on something like pollination and beekeeping with certification? And so I'm just making the point that it's very difficult to actually follow a really interesting presentation on pollination with certification, and it's a common problem that I have, so we'll see how I go. So I'm going to cover GrowSafe, and I think there's a real good opportunity for your industry in terms of ag chem training, which sounds really dull, but when I go through it with you, you might hopefully think a little bit differently. And the second part of the presentation is going to be about GAP and some of the opportunities that you might have there. So I'll quickly go through the GrowSafe part of it, and so just an overview of GrowSafe. Can you have a hands up here about how many people have GrowSafe certificates? Fair chunk of you. So it's pretty important in our industry. GrowSafe is run by the Ag Chem Education Trust. I'm the business manager for the trust. The trust represents all agrochemical users in New Zealand. So it's actually becoming a pretty important organisation. When there is reviews of agrochemical registrations, there's changes in legislation around agrochemical use, regional council rules. There's a lot of that going on at the moment, and the trust is playing a pretty important role in keeping the regulator at bay. It's a not-for-profit, and you probably can't see there the list of organisations: Federated Farmers, Horticulture New Zealand, the Forest Owners, AgCom, which is the agrochemical distributors and manufacturers industry organisation, Pipfruit New Zealand, Zespri Rural Contractors, Foundation for Arable Research, Wine Growers, and the Agriculture Aviation Organisation. So it is a comprehensive representation of ag chem users. It's pretty important. 20 years old and has certified over 80,000 people in the last few years. GrowSafe's had a bit of a bad reputation in the last few years as being just a compliance ticket that costs lots of money, and we've been working pretty hard to try and change that value proposition. What GrowSafe does for you, it meets your GAP requirements, meets your regional council air plan requirements, and I don't expect that many of you have been through and read the regional council air plan requirements for agrochemicals. Basically, applying an agrochemical is illegal until you make it legal for yourself. So it's a consentable activity. You can either stump up and fill out the forms to get a resource consent, or you can meet the requirements in the plan with a GrowSafe certificate and with a spray diary record and advising your neighbours. That's how you make a chem application a legal activity for yourself. So GrowSafe's pretty important in that. There are a lot of new health and safety work, or not a lot of new legislation around health and safety. You've probably been reading about it in the papers, the new regulator, WorkSafe New Zealand. That's got to become quite important. So I'll talk about that more in the GAP process. Approved handler to actually purchase agrochemicals. GrowSafe covers that, and it covers the standard NZS 8409, which actually underpins a lot of regulation to enable you to use agrochemicals. So NZS 8409 is a standard, a national standard for ag chem use. I don't expect you to have read it, but written into all sorts of air plans and regulations is NZS 8409. So we say if you meet NZS 8409, you meet all those legal requirements. GrowSafe is the evidence that you meet NZS 8409. So sorry if that sounds all complicated, but that's how the cogs grind. Anyway, why is this important to you guys? GrowSafe has historically been a one-stop shop. There's the trainer, there's the course. Everyone does the same course if you're a dairy farmer, a forester, or a horticulturalist. There was one program. Hasn't been effective. People haven't been getting what they need out of the training. So what we've done is we've split it up and sectorised it. So there's the wine growers have their own GrowSafe program. Pastoral sector, the dairy industry is kicking off through January, February. We're looking to certify about 10,000 dairy farmers in the next 2 years. Tree crops, this is where you guys fit in, under the group exotics. In tree crops there is an avocado course, a citrus course, kiwi fruit, pip fruit, summer fruit, and we've collected up the exotic crops, feijoas, passion fruit, persimmons, etc. And we'll have a specific course for you guys. There's amenity and field crops, vegetables and grain crops. So we've got all the ag chem users covered with their own specific courses. And what we're doing is we're taking away the paper workbook and we're putting in its place some really good workshops, some field events like this on ag chems. We're adopting a points-based system. So if, for example, you did a session in a field day like this on an agrochemical topic, you would register that event with us at GrowSafe, and every one of you would collect 10 points. So over a period of 5 years, you would collect, say, 100 points. Your GrowSafe certificate would automatically roll over without you having to attend a course. So there'd be a small fee there, but you wouldn't have to go and attend a workshop. Okay, so this is what's new. In addition to that, there'll be lots of really relevant and valuable information for you about agrochemical use that you'll have access to via your smartphone apps, via your PC. There'll be regular updates about agrochemical use. And why I think this is valuable to you guys is that actually the framework of GrowSafe actually puts you in contact with some really smart ag-chem experts. So we're aligning ourselves with Dr. David Magdalow, who some of you may be aware of. He does work on agrochemical effectiveness. There's Dr. Bruce Mackay from Massey University, who is very good at education and turning agrochemical information into good, valuable education resources. We've got Precision Ag at Lincoln involved. So we've got the smartest brains we can find and the best educationalists we can find, and we're combining the efforts and starting to link it to GrowSafe. So hopefully, if you're involved in GrowSafe, you'll start to have access to some of that really good info. I won't go through that. There's probably no surprises there for you. So there's 2 levels. Anyone coming into our industry for the first time, we do a very, very practical ag chem training session. After 5 years, you've probably had some experience. Then you'd go to another higher level, and there's some more about more theoretical stuff about calibrations and calculations and nozzling and those sorts of things. And from that second course on, you're into this progressive points-based renewal. Okay, so that's the new model that we've developed and implemented. We're talking about 100 points over 5 years for renewal. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say about GrowSafe. But I think that's a really good opportunity for your industry to bring some of that into the strategy of the industry so that you can be engaged in it. Right, New Zealand Gap. Okay, so I'm the business manager for New Zealand Gap, and just to explain how NZ Gap works, NZ Gap is owned by Horticulture New Zealand. It is owned on behalf of growers, and the representation of growers is via your product groups. So it is a voluntary standard, so it's not compulsory. It's an industry's solution to all of the complexity of regulation and customer requirements. So the whole point of New Zealand Gap is that we take all that complexity, we filter it, and we turn it into a simple framework that you can actually access and that you can get your certificate recognised right around the industry. So with a regulator, a council, or a supermarket, an exporter, they can recognise that triangle, and life is a lot simpler than it would be otherwise. So that's the whole point of New Zealand Gap. So it's voluntary, you don't have to be part of it. You can choose to go and deal with the councils and the supermarkets and everyone yourself with your own solutions. I've mentioned that. It's about 1,500 growers, and that's really important because you get that critical mass, you can sustain the program. New Zealand Gap has been around since 1999. It has only become self-managing and self-sustaining since 2010. Before that, it was propped up by contributions from the industry because they saw it as being valuable in the future to solve the increasing problems posed by compliance. They saw that New Zealand Gap was a good framework to deal with all of that. There was no other model around, so the industry supported it for that up until 2010. Now it's supported by the fees that the growers pay. Okay, so it is self-sustaining, going to be around. We've got 22 crops, and I've got to say New Zealand Gap is really coming into its own at the moment. There is this massive proliferation of private standards, and wherever you're going to, wherever your product is going to in New Zealand or in overseas markets, there are private standards like New Zealand Gap in those markets that are emerging in just about every topic you can imagine. People are looking at each other and saying, how does industry regulate itself? What's the role of government in regulating industry now? And one of the big picture trends that's emerging at the moment is these programs have been around and have increased in scale and complexity over about 20 years. The government, this is governments around the world, have been sitting still and have not been actively enforcing regulation or developing smart regulation for decades. How does a government now step up and regulate in the area of health and safety, and food safety, and in all the other areas of agrochemical management, etc., when industry has gone so far ahead itself and they're struggling, what role do they now play in an industry like hort that has about 85% of growers certified, and they want to bring in new food safety regulations? If they bring them in too high, they'll impose unreasonable costs and it'll be unnecessary. If they bring them in too low, they run the risk of sucking everyone back to a lower standard. And I'll point to the approved handler system as a classic example of that. Approved handler system, everyone needs it to buy chems if you're buying hazardous substances. GrowSafe came 10 years before approved handler and did a pretty good job at certifying people. The approved handler system requires you to understand changes in legislation. It's all it requires you to do to renew an approved handler certificate. There are no changes in regulation in the last 10 years. So you don't actually need to do anything to renew an approved handler certificate. To get a GrowSafe certificate, you need to have undergone an assessment and you need to have undergone training in this range of subjects. So there's way more depth to it and it's more valuable. So the approved handler system has completely undermined the industry training program and brought everyone down to a $50 renewal with absolutely no requirements except filling out a form. Now my fear is that if the government sets food safety regulations in the same way, food safety standards will follow that same pattern down. So it's a really important time and really important for programs like New Zealand GAP to actually benchmark itself against what the industry expects of us, what the consumer expects of us, and actually set those standards for ourselves in a responsible way, and don't just leave it to the regulator to do what they need to do with all the constraints and all the culture that sits around that. So New Zealand GAP really is an opportunity for us to take responsibility for ourselves and set appropriate standards for ourselves in a way that we can actually manage. So that's the importance of the program. Overseas people look at New Zealand GAP and they just wonder, how on earth did you do that? Get an industry together with 22 different product groups and come up with a standard setting process that everyone buys into. It's pretty impressive effort. I can't see it having been achieved anywhere else in the world. England's got a program, but it's a very political program. They do it to thumb their nose at the regulator. New Zealand GAP has a different sort of culture about it. In terms of private standards, there is such a myriad of topics and concerns that are now being covered by private standards. So you probably can't read all this, but it's from energy, food safety, food security, biodiversity, agrochemicals, carbon, traceability, pesticides, raw materials, recycling, a whole range of topics. And there are private standards covering all of these things that are growing and developing all the time. Now, it's not just you guys meeting those standards for your own businesses. When you export product over to markets, you're into markets that also have these expectations of their own members. So you've got to prove how you stump up. So New Zealand GAP's job is to cover this, put it in a framework that's accessible, and enable you to certify without you having to go and pick all this apart yourselves. Okay, that's the value proposition for the program. All the way across the supply chain. Now this, to paint the picture, this is getting more and more complicated. And you growers at the end of the supply chain here, in this part of the supply chain, are only part of the equation. Ahead of you are all sorts of costs and all sorts of processes and verifications that are going on with your product beyond your farm gate. We need to be really mindful about how we slot into that and the things that we do and the evidence that we can pass on to the next stage that they can pick up and use to add value to your product and enable it to transfer easily through that supply chain. I'm dealing with the food service industry at the moment. These are the caterers and restaurants. The food safety systems and the food safety standards in that part of the supply chain have just been ramped up. And what they're saying to me is over the last 2 years we've had all of this new paperwork and all of these new systems and training programs and costs added to our catering business and our restaurant. Why would we buy uncertified produce to go into that system? So these are the things further down the track that are affecting you guys and the signals you're getting back to your farm. Okay, so there is in some parts of industry, and quite rightly, some suspicion about GAP programs and about these private standards and who sets them and why, but you're in part of a big jigsaw puzzle of compliance and costs and activities that go on. Okay, so it's not for nothing. New Zealand GAP is a program. It enables you to export around the world. So New Zealand GAP, the basic green certificate, is recognised in Asia, Middle East, America, it's important for you guys. We have a global gap equivalent program which is recognised in Europe. They won't accept the New Zealand gap program. Australia is another important part of the export market that recognises New Zealand gap. So New Zealand gap is widely recognised around the world. That green triangle is quite well respected, particularly in Asia. It's becoming really well recognised. They like it. To have the name New Zealand written on that is seen as quite valuable, and I encourage you on your packaging to get that logo on there for certified produce. It helps. It's better than a country of origin label. So why New Zealand gap? It's demanded by the markets. We want to reduce duplication of multiple programs, manage the cost, I'll go through that soon, set appropriate standards in the language of New Zealand production, not European production or American production, and it meets a wide range of regulations. Our motto is one auditor up the driveway, and we've been pretty successful in achieving that over the last 15 years. There's still one program, and it's still widely recognised, and there's been lots of pressure for other auditors to come up your driveway. These are the organisations that own the program and get involved, and this is part of the value. It's very difficult for an organisation to come in with a new GAP program. I'll give you the example of McCain's. They wanted to bring McCain GAP in for processed vegetable growers in New Zealand, and that was their international procurement policy from head office in, I think, Philadelphia or Canada or somewhere. Anyway, they came in and they looked at it and they said, actually it's very difficult to get a GAP program into New Zealand because New Zealand GAP and Global GAP are so well established here. You'd only have to, you'd be sending the same auditor up the same driveway with another checklist and another bill. And they backed off, which is actually pretty amazing because they were pretty adamant they were going to bring McCain GAP into New Zealand. Now that's just one example, but there are more subtle risks as well from other organisations to try and bring it in. So it's the strength of all of these organisations working together to sort of put up a bit of a filter and a barrier to that continuous flow of compliance that could be coming onto your property. So that's the value proposition. You can see Passion Root is part of the owners group for New Zealand GAP, so you are involved in it at that level. So this is the scope of New Zealand GAP. We cover food safety, traceability. Traceability is becoming increasingly important. Standards of being able to track your product back. Worker welfare has been pretty quiet, but in the next 2 years it's going to become a huge part of your business. Sustainable practices is increasing, and quality is something you set in your own industry and for your own businesses. So this is the scope of the program. It is one checklist. So if you're a potato grower, 2,000 hectares, we do have one of those, you're on the same checklist as the smallest passion fruit grower with 100 vines or 50 vines, whatever the number would be. And that is important because we can say one certificate is recognised as achieving the same outcomes. And if you go through the checklist, you will look at a question and say, but that doesn't apply to me, that's really annoying. That's good. It's not applicable. Here's why. Move on to the next question. It's a framework that applies to everybody, but everyone gets the same recognition at the end of it, whether you're big or small. And that's a really good point of value for you. This is just a list of all of the contents. So it covers a huge range. Works at a risk assessment as the starting point, which enables you to describe the risks in your business. It stops other people telling you what they are. You tell them what they are. And that's a really efficient way to do it. You then go through and say, here's how I manage these risks, and here's the evidence that I do it well. Now that method is really effective, and it's a very New Zealand GAP type of method. And what it does is enables you to take control of your own risks, not people continuously telling you what they are. So that's the beauty of GAP programs and how they're different from regulations. On the horizon, you've got the food bill coming. This is a significant change in the Food Act. The Food Act was written in 1974 and reviewed in 1981. Now if you cast your mind back to 1981, you're talking the Springbok tour. Yeah? That's when the food bill was last looked at. So it's very prescriptive but meaningless. It doesn't mean anything these days. The new food bill, we have been talking for 4 years with MPI on the food bill, and they have just been struggling with how to apply it to horticulture. Supposed to have been passed by Christmas, but the botulism issues in the dairy industry brought the food bill to a grinding halt, and so now it's stuck in no man's land. And one of the outcomes of the botulism issue in the dairy industry is that MPI have gone back and looked at all the food regulations that they had proposed, and they've just ramped them up. So, thank you. Life just got a little bit harder for everybody, particularly in the areas of traceability and in food hygiene. So the food bill was going to be quite basic for horticulture. I had a meeting last week with MPI, and I was absolutely astounded, just about fell off my chair when I saw what they were and now proposing for food safety in horticulture. Luckily, New Zealand GAP probably still exceeds that, but yeah, things are changing fast. Good practice in terms of access to water. Now, you're probably all aware of the debate about water. The Land and Water Forum has set standards for water quality, and councils are setting standards for minimum flows in rivers and protection of water bodies. This affects your access to water. At the moment, the trade-off is who is the biggest producers and who can turn a litre of water into more money. They're getting the water. The dairy industry wins that every time. What we need to argue as an industry is that we are good users of water. So if we use a litre of water, it's actually going into a crop that is going to employ a lot of people, it's going to give us good value exports, and it's done in a sustainable way. We win that argument. We don't win the big business argument. So we've got to be really good at presenting ourselves as an industry, as a good user of water, so that we can continue to have access to it. And we've been pretty successful in the last few years of actually winning those debates, because water has been habitually allocated to the dairy industry, and we've been really successful in winning some of that water back to our own industries on the basis that we are good operators. And New Zealand GAP has been the conversation that's been going on in the courtrooms. So it's valuable as an industry level that we can do that. Certification costs will keep rising. I'm sorry. The reason for that is that the expectation of integrity on the GAP programs is just increasing. Okay, so, and that costs money. The internal audits for our own system, the cost of benchmarking the systems, the cost of getting councils to recognise it is just increasing and putting more pressure on the system itself. Hopefully the auditor time on your orchard doesn't increase too much, but it's all of the actual structure of the programs that the cost is being spent. Health and safety, they are serious about health and safety in the workplace. They've got aims to halve workplace deaths by 2020. This is the result of the Pike River inquiry, and agriculture is number 2 on the list of the new workplace regulator to tackle in terms of workplace safety. So this brings you guys into a higher compliance environment. Now, what New Zealand GAP needs to do is actually look at how we manage workplace safety. This is for visitors to your property, for yourself, and for anyone you're employing. Okay, it's getting really serious. They have, as of next week, there is a group of about half a dozen compliance people from MIMBI, which is the ministry that is dealing with workplace safety, in Bay of Plenty, with a team of people targeting farms and horticulture operations. So these are spot checks. They will stump up to your driveway, and they'll come and have a look at your operations. They are interested in the equipment that you use, quad bikes and farm machinery, chainsaws and things like that. Okay, so that's the type of thing that we're going to start seeing. I'll be interested if any of you get a visit to hear what the process was. Global GAP. Does anyone not heard of Global GAP or understand what Global GAP is? Okay. In terms of GAP systems, it's the biggest. There's about 150,000 Global GAP certified farms around the world. So it's a big gig. They set the standards now. They're moving into Australia. And why I'm concerned about that is our biggest supermarket chain, Countdown, is an Australian company. Global GAP have gone in there and said, look, you run your WQA system, you're concerned about all these GAP issues. What say we take over and set a standard in Australia, and you can just recognise our standard, we'll work together. Now the supermarket said, there's a compelling opportunity. Why don't we just do that? The risk for New Zealand is that the Global GAP standard, all of the complexity and all of the inefficiency of Global GAP will start to creep across the Tasman. This is something I've got my eye on, and this is why we need to strengthen New Zealand GAP with a unified front window to say we don't need that. We are best to keep it at bay. It's complex. How do you certify crops in Poland, in Asia, in Europe, in Australia, in the States, with one standard. And we struggle to do it in New Zealand. How do they expect to do that? It just becomes more and more complex and unworkable. So this is why we need a good defensive mechanism, okay, to protect ourselves from this sort of shift. Councils will demand production data. In the very near future, they're going to want to know your water use. They're going to want to know your fertilizer applications. They're going to want to know your agrochemical uses. They want the real data. They're going to ask for your spray diary. They're going to ask for your water meter. Okay? They're going to be tracking the trends. This is the new world. It's not just the checklist, that's step one. What's coming in the future is the checklist, and the key points in that checklist, they want the data as well. So the market's going to ask for the data, and the regulator's going to ask for the data. And this is going to come in about 2016. This will start to kick in. So brace yourselves. Okay? We're trying to think about smart ways now where we can actually get that data and transfer it easily and seamlessly without you guys having to sit down and actually start from scratch and work out a system yourself. We're looking at models in the fishing industry, how they get all of that data off fishing boats, and regulators in multiple departments see that data every night. We're looking at smart ways that we can use technology to actually start to transfer that data. Okay? So sorry if this is a little bit scary, a bit frightening, but it is what is happening. Okay? We need to find solutions for it. Right. This is a summary of the costs of GAP programs. Basic New Zealand GAP certificate is $520. It's just gone up from $404. The reason it's gone up is because of what I just described in terms of we have to run a more complicated back end to New Zealand GAP. Okay, and that is costing more and more money to get people to come and develop the program to the next level, and to just continuously re-benchmark it. It costs a lot of money. Okay, so that's why the costs are going up. It's a 3-year audit plus a random in between. Okay, that's the efficiency of the program. Without that 3-year audit cycle, we're back into annual audits, and we've been paying about $900 a year. Okay, so that 3-year audit cycle has come about because it was implemented right at the start of New Zealand GAP when it first came about in the late 90s. The 3-year audit cycle was part of the program. We've defended it. It's getting harder to do, but we've defended that 3-year cycle when others have an annual audit, and that's why it's $520. Global GAP's $1,650 a year with an annual audit, and WQA is $3,500 a year with a 6-monthly audit. Now I'm going to talk to you about group schemes, which are cheaper than this again, but this is one of the key drivers of New Zealand GAP, is a cheap and accessible system for small and medium sized growers. Okay, this is part of the whole value proposition. Can we do it cheaper? I'm constantly finding ways to try and cut costs out of it. Okay, but that's where it sits at the moment. These are the schemes. Sorry, you probably can't see the middle one there. We're heading next year to a 3-tier system for New Zealand GAP. This is the basic green scheme. This is called GFSI, Global Food Safety Initiative. So we're putting New Zealand GAP up for benchmarking to a European food safety standard called GFSI. What that means is that the map I showed you where we get recognised around the world, we supercharge that and we cement in place that recognition. That's one of the highest levels of recognition you can get for a food safety program. People will look at it and say, hey, GFSI, great. Okay, so it kind of secures our value. It's an annual audit, so it goes to $950 a year. Not everyone needs that, and a lot of you here won't need that. But there's a lot of growers that actually need to stump up to that level now. And then we have our Global GAP equivalent scheme where we benchmark New Zealand GAP to the Global GAP standard. So you get the Global GAP equivalent audit done, you get a Global GAP certificate, and that's at $1,600 per year. So we're going to a 3-tier system, so you can choose the scheme you need, and you can get that appropriate certification. But it makes life more complex. This is the model for an individual certificate, which most of you would be on. So you're the grower, certified to New Zealand GAP, i.e. program. The auditor, SGS or Assure Quality, audits you. So you pay us the fee, we pay the auditor the cost of the audit. So they charge us $520 to audit you every time. We charge $520 a year. Out of that we run all the other services, which I'll go through soon. So this is how it works in the individual scheme scenario. Now the reason that we do it like that is we hold the audit bodies, the certification bodies, to a cost. they would just ramp the cost up if we couldn't say to them, well, we're bringing you 1,500 audits. We negotiate pretty firmly on the price of those audits. If you were negotiating yourselves with them, you'd be creeping up to mid 600s probably. So there is some value in that membership model that we run. So for an individual certificate, you hold the certificate yourself. You can supply any market you wish with that certificate. Everyone will recognise it. And you get the 2-year audits and then the 3-year cycle after that. The cons, it's more expensive than another alternative, and you don't get the central support for certification. You're doing it yourself. Pluses and minuses. This is the alternative model that you can look at. An organisation such as Passion Fruit Growers New Zealand, that's the name of the organisation. An exporter or a group of growers can get together and form a group scheme. So you organise an audit yourself against the standard, and you pay us a small fee per year. So it's about $65 per grower that you would pay the scheme owner, not $520. But you pay for the audits yourself. There is one certificate that is owned by the group, and there's a list of growers that come under that certificate. Okay? So it's a very efficient system. This is the cost of it. So this is a scenario with 30 farms. You probably can't see this, but what it shows is that with 30 farms, the square root of the number of growers is audited every year, so 8. You pay only for those audits, not the rest of the growers. There is a set fee for the quality management system. So that's the system under which you operate, all the rules and the processes that the group operates under. So it's about $2,600 per year to have that audited. We take a levy of $62 for New Zealand GAAP. So the total cost of the scheme comes out at $8,620 in the first year, but you get to divide that by the 30 growers. So instead of $520 a year, you're talking at $287 per grower in that first year. In the second year of the program, the square root, the number of growers audited drops. So 6 growers get audited. Those other costs remain the same, and you're down to $252 per year, and it will be that cost from there on. So that's compared to $520. You're running it yourself. There's additional costs to run the program yourself that you need to take into account. So it's cheaper, you get better support, and it's accessible to small growers. Now I think this is something that you could explore as an industry organisation or through the exporters. Okay, cost of certification is lower and it's more accessible to smaller growers. So we have, these are quite common in the avocado industry. We've got some tomato growers in Pukekohe looking at this, and some other growers north of Auckland are looking at a group scheme as well for vegetable production. So they're becoming increasingly common, these schemes. Okay, they're not left field, there's no loss of integrity, but they are a really good opportunity for you guys to get together and start to manage your own GAP programs. The downside is that you can only supply fruit to the certificate holder. Okay, you can't trade your fruit outside the group. You can, but it loses its certification. So you think about what that means to your business. Sometimes that doesn't matter. Pros are significantly lower cost. You get a high level of support from the group. You get high levels of compliance. And you can tailor your scheme to meet the specific needs of your customers. You're not in the generic program. Okay, and you get smaller growers certified. You get large numbers in your scheme. You don't hold a certificate yourself. That's the downside. Okay, so it's a bit of a harder explanation to say that you're part of the program. You can't trade outside the certificate. You have annual internal audits, not 3 yearly cycles. And there are additional costs for the scheme that they may or may not want to pass back to you. Where does the money go from your fees? The vast majority of your annual fee goes to the audit and to the residue testing. The management and administration is the costs of the committee, my time. There's a full-time administrator on New Zealand GAAP, and all of the management of it. That is 13%. System development is the bit that's expanding. That used to be about 3%. It's now up around 10%. That's the bit that's adding cost to the system. That's just going to increase and increase as we need more projects and development work on the system to get that recognition. There's other costs like promotion and developing information about the program, which is about 6% of the total cost. So that's where the money goes. Most of it is in audits and residue testing. I've already been through this. I'll pick up this last point here. The United States Food Safety Modernization Act, because you guys focused a lot on the US market, this will affect you. It will affect your exporters. So this is Obama's new lot of food safety rules. And just like our own rules, all the discussion around this have come to a grinding halt. Obama can't get his food safety rules through Congress because Congress has linked the food safety rules to farmer subsidies. The farmer subsidies have been linked to food stamps for the poor. So they can't get the food safety rules changed because the Republicans want food stamps for the poor removed. Welcome to America. The New Zealand gap has been put up there to say, actually, we already cover this stuff. Can we get a free ride? And they've gone, okay, let's just get on with it. So New Zealand gap will be very valuable to your industry to stop additional audits and costs for market access into the US. Land and water. This is really ramping up. As I've said before, we're looking at catchments. The catchment you're in, you need to recognise who's around you, what activities are going on, and how water use and water runoff and soil management is being affected in the catchments. Get to know your neighbours, get to know what they do, and get to know how you fit in. If you're in public meetings about water use and you hold a New Zealand Gap certificate, refer to that. Don't get caught up in all of the mire of all of the discussions around water use. Horticulture New Zealand is getting recognition of New Zealand Gap by your regional council in this whole framework. This recognition around New Zealand Gap is increasing. So have that in the back of your mind. I've got a New Zealand Gap certificate. Okay? There's lots of discussion and debate and fighting about water that is happening in other sectors. Okay, so just be aware of that. The model is called audited self-management. So we put New Zealand Gap up, the whole system, as an audited self-management system. They've gone through all of the environmental regulations that apply, and New Zealand Gap is slotted in there at a regulatory level as being recognised. Okay, so that's how it solves that problem. Talked about the food bill. You'll need to register any food producer or supplier of food will need to be registered with MPI in 2015. So what happens if you have an NZ Gap certificate is I'll register you automatically. And every night at midnight, the new list of NZ Gap certificates goes over to MPI and updates their database. If you don't have a New Zealand Gap certificate, you're going to have to find out how you get registered, and you're going to have to undergo audits, and you're going to have to explain how you meet the same requirements. It's pretty much the equivalent standard of a New Zealand Gap certificate, but you'll have to explain some other way about how you meet those requirements to the regulator, and that's something that needs to be solved. You'll be subject to increased surveillance. They will take the New Zealand Gap list and they'll say, you guys are covered. Who else is a food business that's not on that list? How are we going to manage them? Surveillance will start to focus more and more on those growers that are not in the program. It'd be like sitting in a fishbowl. So the food safety regulator, the health and safety regulator, and the environment regulator will be saying New Zealand Gap's covered, who else is left? And it's going to be harder and harder not to be certified. Okay, so sorry if that's bad news, but it's just the regulation increasing, and what does that mean to small growers? So just in summary, I think for your industry, because you have an export focus and the nature of your industry is small growers, and you have also a local program, local markets, you sit in a very interesting space in the GAP system. You don't have the scale to solve the problems of the big guys, but the increasing challenge from regulation and from the market hits you as much as it hits them. My suggestion to you is get good at this stuff as an industry and as individuals. because it's not going away, it's only getting harder, it's got to challenge your businesses. Find smart ways to get together to manage the cost and all of the burden of this, and make sure that you are continuously engaged in the industry discussions through the Horticulture New Zealand product groups and through other industry meetings to make sure that you're part of the discussion about how this is being solved. Horticulture is miles ahead of other industries, and we need to stay there. Now, at the moment, I think the discussion will be very much about how can New Zealand Gap work with your committee to start to look at how New Zealand Gap can become part of the strategy, and I see it's in the 43 action points on the wall up there that New Zealand Gap has mentioned in one of them. So I'm pretty happy to work with you guys through your committee to actually work out how we can get New Zealand Gap as part of that strategy. Happy to take questions or comments. The question is about the use of the logo, and can it be, and is it only for use on certified product? Is that the question? Yes. Yep. It may only be used on certified product, and with the signing of a license agreement to use that logo. That's pretty clear in the rules. Strongly encourage you to use the logo, but you'll need to find ways to differentiate the packaging. One of the things we're looking at for some smaller groups is little green stickers that can be used on certified product that can be distributed.
How would we get hold of those?
We would distribute them from the New Zealand Gap office.
No, but they're not in production.
Not yet, no. Probably in the new year we're looking at that. There's demanded from other industries. The herb industry is actually started that initiative. The question back there? Yeah, the question is if you grow multiple crops, how does group certification work with that? It'll be of less value to someone having to certify multiple crops. So there's a fee of $404 to join the scheme. The reason for that is that $520 fee is based on a 3-year audit cycle, but in your first 2 years of the program you got 2 audits. So what we were finding in the program is that people were getting 2 audits and then leaving the scheme in the 3rd year. So we were out of pocket to the tune of about $300. And we had so many growers doing that we were starting to go into a big hole. And so we had to establish that fee to actually get you through the first 2 years of certification. The question is, how often do we shut farms down because of issues? Yep. So the 4 examples this year where farms have had their certificates removed and stopped.
And do you have the power to stop them trading or milking? Or?
No, we can only remove their certificate. Only the regulator can stop them trading. The question is about the frequency of residue testing.
Yep.
Okay, so New Zealand Gap runs a random residue testing program. Once a month we go into we will select at random a point of sale that could be a wholesaler or a retailer, and we will go and randomly select product and of a certified grower, and we do 5 in the quiet seasons through winter. There'll be 5 randomly selected growers, and in the peak season of harvest there's 10 randomly selected growers, and you will residue test those products. The question is about the certification number. Yeah, so the certification number is linked to a property. So there's the owner, the manager, the decision maker, the crops, and the area, and they get a certificate number. Yep, there's a database on the New Zealand Gap website, and this is where your customers come in and look. You can look up a certificate number, and it happens at 4 o'clock in the morning when your stuff's going across a market floor. There's people in the warehouse, they're scanning products in, and the Gap certificate number has to be current or they can't scan it. Okay, and it's an automated system that happens, and I get a phone call at about 7 o'clock in the morning if one hasn't gone through, and the main reason is that the certificate has expired, it's gone past an anniversary date, and the grower hasn't renewed it. That's the main problem. So the question is when the points-based GrowSafe renewal system will come into effect. Through February, March next year it will come into effect, and what we are hoping is that we can retrospectively look at the workshops you've been to. If you can provide evidence, we'll collect those points. So depending on how frequently you go to workshops, you may be able to collect that 100 points. Mm-hmm. My suggestion is that as an organisation, you grab a list of all of the people with GrowSafe certificates. We'll grab the database from Wellington and we'll match it up to see when your certificates expire, and we can automatically sign you up to the new system without you doing anything. If you want to opt out, we'll give you the opportunity to opt out of this new system. We think most people will want to stay in. So that's what's happening through the new year.
Okay, so will you mail that to us or email it to us?
Yep, there'll be information coming to growers soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The question is, are growers notified that a residue test has occurred? Yeah. The answer to that is no, not at the moment, but we are looking to establish that communication. They are notified where there's been a problem.
Don't hear anything.
No news is good news.
No news is good news. Yeah. The question is, if you have multiple crops, do you need multiple certificates? It's quite a unique problem to kiwi fruit growers that have other crops, because Zespri have the PMO for Global Gap, and around that is a lot of other sustainability and agrochemical management systems that Zespri run. But Zespri don't certify other crops. So you either need another GAP certificate to cover the other crops, or join a group scheme for the other crop, which is a duplication of your certification. Now, that's the way it is at the moment. I think in the future we could look at New Zealand GAP recognising another GAP certificate, so long as the scope includes the other crops. It works really well where the other crops are grown in the same property with the same management system. It's not so easy where the other crop is 20 k's down the road with another manager on it. Okay, so there's something we're going to look at. So we will certify an owner at first. It's about the business first. So it's the owner, the decision maker. So the owner could live in Auckland. Who's making the decisions on this property? That's the second thing we register. We then register the crops. So there could be a crop that you don't certify. We then register the individual properties that you grow those crops on.
So if you have machinery on your property, like what I was just for a hoe,
Yep.
and you might have chainsaw, but you use the chainsaw for cutting the ornamental trees and things, is that still part of the health and safety issue?
So to clarify, the chainsaw is being used on the orchard for the production?
No.
It's not? No, we would not look at a piece of equipment that's not used in the production process.
Good.
And if auditors are looking at your lawnmowers, your chainsaws that you're not using in your orchard, it's out of the scope of the audit. Okay? The reason they look at your mower, your ride-on mower, if you're using them in your orchard, is because of the health and safety expectations that the regulator has. Yeah. It's not about the food safety aspects. You're using it in your production process, so it's audited. Okay, so the question is about the green stickers that we're going to put on offer to label individual cartons, and what's the risk or the consequence of someone grabbing those stickers and putting them on non-certified products. That is a risk.
Write
And that's
your number
about-
on it. Would you write your number on it?
Well, your number should be on your carton anyway. There's not much that we...
Gap number is
You could put the gap number on your on your carton. Yeah, you're not required to, but I highly
You could
recommend
write it
that
on
you
the
do.
label.
Yep, have a stamp. Yeah, so there is nothing we can do about that, but if we come across that situation and people are claiming to have a GAP certificate that don't, then we'll be dealing with those individuals, and I'm not sure what powers we could have, but we'd certainly be onto them. Yeah. If anyone misuses a GAP certificate, and that has happened in the last 12 months, they are withdrawn from the program for 12 months, and they have to undergo an audit, and they get pretty well scrutinised to come back into the program. So that's happened once with a grower in Northland this year. The question is, what's the extent to which you have to manage people coming onto your property, and can I extend the question to activities that are going on your property? And what's your own personal business in your running your home versus what's part of GAP certification? Now my suggestion to you is you get a property map and you describe yourself, this is my home, this is my business, and the scope of the audit goes to the business. Now there's some things in your home sheds that are part of your business that are in the scope of certification, but you can yourself manage what's outside the scope of certification. And it's a really smart thing to do to keep the auditors away from your house. Does that answer the question?
Not exactly. Like we've just put up a new shed, all right? Now that's to do with production, but obviously the people that are building the shed have nothing to do with the production.
Okay.
The
They're coming
subcontractors,
in,
etc.
laying concrete, painting, and their contractors coming in. Am I supposed to have got them to sign that, or is that, or not?
No, you are. You are responsible for any work that goes on your property. And the health and safety, new rules around health and safety are really going to tighten that. The example you've got there is a health and safety example, and that's in the scope of New Zealand GAP. So my suggestion would be that the contractors should be giving you their health and safety plan for the job they're doing, and by law they should have that themselves, and you should cite it, and you should take a record that you've cited that. That you can't pass responsibility onto the contractor.
That would come under the Building Act, doesn't it?
No, it's the Health and Safety and Employment Act, that specific example.
Which is under the Building Act, health and safety.
My understanding is that would be under the Health, Safety and Employment Act. It's
The
employment.
Health and Safety and Employment Act of 1992 is under the Building Act.
Okay.
So,
So in the future it's going to come out under its own.
That should be covered by the Building Act, it's under the contracting the building.
Right. So contractors, for their safety and for food safety, if you're bringing a contractor in, that doesn't eliminate you from the responsibility of the outcomes. So your contractor should really be certified, and they should have health and safety and food safety systems with training records for all of the staff they're bringing onto your property, and you should be citing those and making sure they've got those. So although you don't have to do the training, you need to make sure that the training is done.
what about how fussy can you be with, like, say, protective clothing, for example? You know, to what extent? I mean, what do we need in, say, imitation threat situation?
So protective clothing, you need to decide yourself. There are agrochemicals, for example. Okay, the level of protective clothing for agrochemicals, the minimum standards are written on the ACHEM label, and we would expect you to meet that standard as a minimum. But in addition to that, we would expect you to have a think about the situation in which you're applying them. If it's an air blast sprayer or a knapsack are two completely different scenarios. Think it through and what's the appropriate level. You don't want to be walking around with respirators and fully kitted out if you don't need to be, but you should be if that's appropriate. So work it out.
So for us as the owner, we set the standards of what we would we feel is safe.
Yeah, but there are minimum standards written on agrochemical labels that you must meet. That's the minimum standard.
So what about the building of the shed June was talking about? If they've got contractors there, do they need to wear hard hats or things like that if they're climbing up ladders to fit timber onto steel beams?
If the contractor's coming in to build the shed, should they be wearing hard hats, and what standard of PPE should they be wearing? That is entirely up to them and their risk management process. Yeah, that's up to them to meet. But if you want to set additional standards for them, then you would put it into the agreement on the job. Yeah. Okay. So I'm not aware of what the rules are in terms of health and safety and people and contractors working on your home, but I do know that as soon as it's a workplace, those laws kick in, and you as the owner of that workplace hold the responsibility, and you can't pass it on to a contractor and wash your hands of that responsibility. That's my understanding, and it's certainly the intent of the new regulations. So it comes back to my advice and your suggestion about the property map and defining really clearly what is our workplace. It's a really good thing to do.
So it could be quite a grey area between your home and the workplace.
If you don't,
Because I mean, they'll say that when you go to your home to do your office work there, and you go back out to your orchard or whatever. So I don't know, there could be a bit of an argument there.
Yep, so the comment there is that because you're working in your home and your home is part of your business, what is the defining line? My suggestion is, without any thought about what that is yourself, that is really complicated. If you put some thought into it yourself, it becomes a lot more clear.
So you could basically say that your office, where your PC is, that you do your orchard paperwork and documentation, that's the only thing in your home that pertains to your business. You
could do that. Yeah. So the question is about the employment of the auditors and the other jobs, other roles that they might have?
Yeah.
Yep. So we have agreements, we have contracts with two certification bodies, SGS and Assure Quality. The reason that we have them with those is they have the international accreditations to do food safety audits on farms. And that's through an organisation called JASANS, and that's the minimum standard that they have to meet for us. They are employed by Assure Quality and SGS, usually full-time, but in remote areas the auditors are sometimes part-time auditors.
Right.
We don't employ any auditors as New Zealand.
we've got Assure here, and they'd be the ones who would be likely coming out as full-time auditors into your property.
Yep. If you're in a group scheme, the pack houses often are the ones that send out auditors. So the question is about a spray drift incident from a neighbouring orchard onto your property. What responsibility does the
passion fruit grower have towards that spray that's coming over?
Okay, well that's a spray drift incident. my suggestion to you is that you would ring the regional council for a start, and you would report that spray drift incident. The obligation and the liability is on the neighbour that's drifting onto your property. It's called chemical trespass, and they are up for the high jump. Does that answer your question?
They should notify you.
Yeah, and if the contractor in the Bay of Plenty Regional Air Plan, contractors must have a higher level of qualification. So if you've got contractors coming in, or there's contractors on your neighbour's property, they need more than a basic GrowSafe certificate. They need an applied GrowSafe certificate in Bay of Plenty, and my recommendation is that they are registered chemical applicators. A contractor who's spraying for hire or reward needs to be operating at a higher level, and my suggestion is that's going to be kicking in as a more stringent requirement in the next 2 or 3 years. Contractors are different, and I have a great concern about how some of them are operating.
Right. Okay, thank you very much, mate,
No problem.
for coming and doing that.